All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are live and ready to go. Um, Welcome to another Hangout. Thanks for joining us. And another great topic this week, an important topic. So happy to and excited to jump into that. Before we start, I had a thought I wanted to share with you, and then Elori was going to give us a prayer. So I was just reading through a talk by President Faust, given in 2002. And the title of his talk is called "I Believe I Can, I Knew I Could." And he talks about actually the little engine that could. He talks about the talents that we all have to develop. And he of course mentions the parable of the talents given by the Savior, where we know, some magnified their talents and some did not, and some went away ashamed. And in this talk, he shared a poem that I thought was. So the poem goes this way: Father, where shall I work today? And my love flowed warm and free. Then he pointed out a tiny spot and said, "Tend that for me." I answered quickly, "Oh no, not that. Why, no one would ever see, no matter how well my work was done, not that little place for me." And the word he spoke, it was not stern. He answered me tenderly, "Ah, little one, search that heart of thine. Art thou working for them or for me?" Nazareth was a little place, and so was Galilee. So, of course, the backdrop of that poem is we all have our little areas to tend, and we might not feel that that's recognized or noticeable or making us famous or, showing everybody how talented we are. But our Lord recognizes that. And that's where our most important work is, in our homes, in our families, in our communities, in our jobs, whatever we might be doing. So I really like that poem. That last couple lines, Nazareth was a little place and so was Galilee. Our Savior didn't come to be seen. He came to do what he was asked to do. So wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Just lost you for a moment there. Okay. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this wonderful opportunity to meet together and to learn from one another, to be guided with the Spirit and to recognize and understand those things that we need to apply in our lives to be better, to grow, and to help others around us. We're grateful for Brother Stanley for his time to share with us his experience and knowledge, for all of those that are present in this meeting, that we can learn and be edified from one another. We ask thee to bless us with humility, that we may recognize those things that we need to improve on, to help our organizations and our teams and those around us. We pray that our homes are protected and that the Spirit might dwell within our homes and with our families. And we ask all these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Great. Thankful for the prayer to learn from one another. That is what we're doing in these meetings, learning from one another. So we look forward to learning this evening. So just as an update, thank you for your work on the first doohickeys paper.
Yay.
I'm reading through those and working on grading those still, so bear with me on that. You'll start seeing scores on that within the next few days. My goal is definitely by the end or Monday morning to have those all graded for you. And I appreciate it. They all look good as far as looking at them briefly. I know that there's still some questions out there about doohickeys, so the next doohickeys assignment is due at the end of week 8, if I'm thinking correctly. I think that's right. And it's going to be a new paper. So you're going to write a new paper. You're not really editing the one you wrote. You're just identifying 3 new issues and solutions. So it'll be geared towards more of what we will be covering in weeks 6 through 8. So recruiting and hiring, training and development, and motivation and safety. Kind of identify opportunities for doohickeys in that area of HR, if that makes sense. So if you had some of those things in this first paper, that's okay. Maybe you can expand upon those and adjust from there. And then the next paper will be on the next few weeks of topics after that. If that kind of makes sense, we're addressing doohickeys a few problems and solutions at a time. That went well, and I know it's a lot of work, but it's a case study that I think can be very effective. So, any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, just jump right into this week's material. So, once again, a couple case studies. Well, one is more of an instruction guide on recruiting, right? And then the other one is the S.G. Cohen case. So got a lot of examples and a lot of guidance in that reading. So my goal is to kind of discuss and hopefully increase our understanding of what recruiting and hiring should look like. I think from our reading we find out what the opportunities are, and on the over that recruiting tends to see. Assessing and recruiting top talent. We want to really kind of dive into what that means, because there's some science behind it. There's a lot of following your gut, or just, hey, I know this person type of stuff. But there's some methods, there's some models and different things that I think can offer guidance. So any initial thoughts on the definitive guide to recruiting in good times and bad? As far as just initial impressions, what jumped out? What's the problems they're addressing? And some of those practices, kind of want to focus on the problems first, not to be negative, but I think we sometimes have one understanding of what recruiting is, but they make some really good recommendations. So any initial thoughts? I can kind of kickstart.
I don't know. I think there was.
Go ahead.
There was. Seemed like a lot of people kind of going through what I would call like a cattle call. Get them in and out and get as much information as quickly as possible, and not really getting a really good feel of what that person could actually do for the company.
Okay, so are you referring to the Cohen case?
Yes.
Yeah. Any other comments on that about the Cohen case? Yeah, moving cattle through. I like that.
I'm from Texas.
Yeah, there we go.
I think it's interesting that they took all that time to do all that recruiting on campus and then tried to crunch it all into one big Saturday to make the big decision. It's like, I don't know, it seems that, and there's so many people involved in trying to, based on the definitive guide, picking the right people to do the interviews, seemed important. In the case, it just seemed like there were so many people involved with so many differing opinions about what they wanted. It seemed kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot going on in one day with that Cohen case. Yeah.
Well, they were like, we have to decide because we all want to get out of the snow. It's like, well, maybe this isn't the best day to decide, because, you're under pressure. You might, make a decision that's not real great because you didn't take the proper time.
Like a rash decision.
Say that again, Courtney.
Like a rash decision.
A rash decision, yeah. Yeah. Getting in a hurry is not
It's not
always a
pleasant.
helpful thing. No. What else did you notice?
My group, I noticed that out of the 4 people that were suggested for the Cohen case, that one of the guys, he may have had a poor GPA, but you need to think about everything he was doing that took away from him studying, that lowered his GPA. All the serviceable things.
Right. Let's see. And I can't remember all their names.
That was Andy Sanchez.
Okay, Sanchez. Yeah, so 4 unique individuals. These guys are on the, Andy Sanchez. These guys are on the maybe list, and they're kind of giving us some background about these people. So, you know, and you're going to run into a lot of maybes. Interesting thing is they've got plenty of yeses and nos, but then these 4 maybes that they've got to hurry up and decide on. So, yeah, so, you know, we've kind of laid out what's going on. So we have kind of a crunch day, like, hey, we've got to get this done. It's snowing. We got to get out of here and hurry up. We've got multiple people looking for different attributes. Is the interview, I mean, is it an interview? It's not very consistent, is it? And is that a problem?
I was kind of confused about what it was they were actually wanting from them. The pool that's left, these group of maybes have such a different to bring to the table that if they had a really clear understanding of what exactly, you know, like in the definitive guide, you know, specify the job, understand what you really want so that you can apply that a little more, what's the word? With less opinion. What, I can't think of the word, won't come in my head. Unbiased. They're, you know, just a little less biased because they're looking at filling the job instead of like, because one of the things that stood out to me was when they were, one of the interviewers was complaining about, let me find his name here, Ken. How Ken wanted, you know, he's a family man. He wanted to make sure his family life was balanced. And one of the guys says, well, I miss stuff all the time. What's his problem? You know, it's just part of the job, you know, and that's a pretty strong opinion going into, you know, making that, you know, you're not really thinking about, does he fit the job? You've gone outside of that. So you, again, just kind of, I was confused about what they really wanted out of these people. Each candidate had something to offer, and it doesn't, you know, it seemed like they were voting on personality rather than, you know, the job.
Yeah, I like that. So confusion, knowing what you want, I think is a common theme. Anybody else agree or disagree?
I was a little bit in the opposite. I
Okay.
felt that it was a strong point for the Saturday thing that they all were different, had different backgrounds and opinions, and that helped them to see different things in each candidate. Also, the fact that they were having multiple interviews with little breaks could show what the candidate was made of. You know, when you're interviewing people, yes, you need to see if their qualifications are right there with the job, but also it's about personalities. It's about if they're willing to do what is required of them. So from the perspective of the interviewer, I think that would help me get what I wanted to see from the candidates. But that's just from that side of, you know.
Yeah, so there's definitely some reasoning behind why they're doing it that way, right, Elori? That's what you're saying. So they're pulling a lot of different kinds of information, different perspectives. Any other thoughts on if you like the format or if they need to be more specific? I think both sides of that are worth conversing about because both has positives. on it, do you think?
Me?
Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if there's ways to capture maybe some of that diversity that you're talking about, Ilori,
Yes.
and then also have the structure.
Yes,
that is needed.
obviously there are a lot of things that are missing there that they could improve on, the interviewers. But I think also the fact that they were able to get as much that information that we're getting in the case from each candidate, it tells us that they really evaluated and get the best of everyone.
Good. Yeah, it's kind of a unique event. But it reminds me of what you kind of do at a career fair. We're actually looking to make decisions based on that. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking that maybe, when it comes to job interviews, you go in thinking that you know what you want, but you really don't want a cookie cutter. You're not going to find the perfect person to fill all requirements. So you've got to be a little flexible, I guess, as you're interviewing, and try to seek out the strengths of that person to see where that person would fit in that job. Of course, you want to try to get as close to that fit as possible, but you're not going to find that it was Christ himself interviewing.
You can't find the perfect candidate.
Right.
Did I understand right that there were 30 bankers helping in the interview process, or just in the decision-making process? Because it says on the Saturday they had 5 interviews at 30-minute intervals, and that 30 bankers were attending to help in the decision-making process. Do we know how many interviewers there actually were? I couldn't seem to figure that out.
Did anybody catch that?
I was just looking at the Super Saturday portion of the case. Let's see.
I believe it was 30.
So it says interviews begin at 9. Each interviewer and each candidate has 5 half-hour sessions with short breaks. 30 candidates attended, and 30 bankers came to give up their Saturday. Yep. So it seems like there were a lot of different interviewers. I mean, definitely more than what it suggested in the guide, because it says that the greater number, and I thought this applied really well, the greater the number of filters you include, the more likely, the greater the number of filters you include in your interview process, the more you reduce your risk of hiring the wrong person, but also the more you increase your risk of rejecting the right person, because this person doesn't like this about them, or this other person doesn't like this. And they say you need 3 really good independent top caliber interviewers, and that's it. So that was a really big difference between the 2 groups, or the 2 ideas, or whatever, how the execution on the other side. So I haven't been through any interview process in so many years. Has anybody ever been through like a high stress interview process where, where you see kind of there's too many people involved or too few? Or
I have.
I have.
As a matter of fact, when I lost my last job, I was interviewing for a management position in a different dental office. They wanted me to manage five of their practices, and I sat down with the owner and his wife for about a half-hour interview, and then immediately following that, they pulled me into another room where there was 20 people, where I sat down and was interviewed by 20 people at the same time.
Wow.
And that was a little uncomfortable. But
So how'd it go? Were they all just firing questions at you?
oh yeah, they all took turns asking me questions, and it turned into like a 3 or 4 hour interview where they eventually offered me the job, but I declined after thinking about it because I didn't like what they offered. But yeah, it was a lot of stress. It was too many people talking to me. They all had different things they wanted to ask me, but I wasn't going to really be working with any of them. So it was weird.
Well, there you go. Well, they offered you the job. I guess they came to a decision to offer it to you. But I think that would be it'd be tough to come to a consensus.
Right.
Well, I kind of feel like they didn't, I don't know what they were, they didn't really describe how they came to a conclusion. So one of my thoughts was it might not be a bad thing if once they send all the candidates home and they sit in the room and they talk about these guys and they all come to an agreement, that maybe that helps when when they offer the position and the candidate comes on and starts working, that everyone agreed on hiring this person, and so they're all going to welcome him in a little bit more.
That's true. It can create for some good buy-in on the decision.
Because it seems like it's a smaller type of company where there might be, room for people to be flexible and maybe do different things. And so, the group would have been there when they hired them, and so they're on board with the hire.
Good point. So 20-person panels could have some positives. No, I agree. I think that definitely buy-in can be an important thing. What else did Cohen do as far as in the case? I think we have a little bit of some attachments in there too. They're big on the note-taking. If you read through some of those notes. And then they had the matrix. Did you see that matrix sheet that they use? What did you think of that?
It almost seems like the matrix is like a rating chart.
Like a grading chart? Yeah.
Like a rating chart, yeah. Like if someone does this, give them like a 3 or 2 or something. Just it's across the board. Or just like an X.
Yeah.
So they
Right. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if they're putting number ratings there or just marking the boxes. So, do you think this could be helpful, or that this is a good thing?
I think it could be helpful if we knew how it was used.
Yeah, we don't have as much information, do we?
Yeah.
We also talked in our group about the level of subjectiveness involved in the evaluation form. So if, that you wonder kind of what instruction they might need to give in filling this out to help them be more objective. At the same time, I like what Ilari said about it's not just about filling the position and the qualifications, but the personality. So personality, feelings, that stuff does come into it. No matter, you really do need to find a right fit, because just because they have the education doesn't always mean a good right fit. And so my thought was it'd be interesting to see what the instructions on something like this would be in order to help this be as effective as possible.
Yeah, good point on the subjectivity. My judgment of, somebody's commitment to the firm might be a lot different than, you guys's, and vice versa. So you have to be able to talk through what we're looking for in each of those attributes and have some solid agreement on that. I think, so there's 2 areas that I wanted to zone in on. So in all of the way I talk about it is in hiring is you're looking for core competencies. And that's, that's the on the side of, hey, we need to know what we really want in this position. And attributes, different personality traits, but these 2 or 3 or 4 competencies are what we can't go without.
Yeah, and I think with like personality traits, whatever, it's more of like the aura and their demeanor. They can bring to the group and the business.
Yeah, kind of the intangible attributes, right? And so the core competencies, that is something, if you can kind of think about it in that mentality, as an HR partner, I sit in on a ton of interviews. We're interviewing for frontline supervisors right now this week. I've sat in on senior management interviews and our site director interviews. And one of the questions I always ask as we come to an end and got it narrowed down to the top 2 or 3 people, the decision starts to become more difficult. And that's a good thing. You want to have it be a hard decision. But the question I always ask is, okay, what do you really need out of this position? And I think that it can be super helpful because you might get someone that's super talented, they've interviewed really well, and you say they'd be great. And then you interview a candidate too, and they say, oh, they'd bring this and this to the table. They'd be great too. And that can go on and on. But if you know, hey, I need, go ahead.
They're great to be in 2 different aspects, though. They could be like one serviceable, of giving service and helping others, whereas the other one could be like their speech.
Yeah. So different skills, different attributes that kind of shine through that are all good. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, John. It's good when you can narrow it down. So you want to be able to narrow it down. So I think SG Cohen, it's great that they do this Super Saturday. And then this competency sheet or this evaluation form shows me a little bit that maybe they have some of those core competencies in mind, but we don't have all of that information. And so as long as you can have a varied panel, but as long as you're talking to those competencies and knowing what you're looking for, that can take you a long way. So anybody experience that or have a thought on that or disagree with that? So is there anybody out there that has decisions that experience that, like maybe a your bad experience of having that?
Well, I don't know if these apply, but I had an experience with interviewing. Well, this goes first. This goes with the other paper, developing the pool. Sometimes I've seen that, it's difficult to have the right number of people to interview to fill a position. And that's difficult because you really want to have, when you go through those steps of hiring somebody, you really want to fill the position because you need that person. So I had an experience where we didn't have a lot of people, and we ended up hiring the best fit, but it was not necessarily the person that we needed. And the consequence of that, it was that, that person ended up not doing their job, and it brought a lot of things to the table that we were not necessarily needing at the time. So I think learning from the paper and from the cases and my experience, I think even if we wait a little bit more time, is better to have the right number of people for that pool. Make sense?
Yes, great comment. Yep, a bad hire is very costly in more ways than one, right?
Yes.
So it sounded like, and maybe we can all relate to that, where you're in a situation, it's we got to fill this position, but you're hiring maybe the best of the worst.
Yes.
Or you have a group of people and you're not getting the right competencies, but you're in a hurry, so you pick one. Yeah, good. That's a great example.
You mentioned about being in a hurry. It's hard because my husband was working in a group that was understaffed, and the same thing. They were in a hurry, and they ended up picking. They only had a couple of applicants for the particular qualification, fit, and whatever, and so they just picked the better of the two, and it ended up just being 2 years of just craziness because it was a very hard thing. But it's like, it makes you wonder if it would have been easier just to live with the crunch and wait it out, like Larry said, and to wait it out, get the pool, give it time. Don't try to make don't try to put the square peg in the round hole. It's just never ever going to work. So the rush is always hard on the decision making. I remember it's been a long time since I've been in the workforce, but when I needed a job, I drove up. This is a long time ago. I just drove up to I was doing CNA work. I just drove up to a small nursing home and walked in, and they hired me. There was no, they're like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, we have to fill this hole. They didn't know anything about me. Now, fortunately, I was a good worker, but didn't have to be. They just hired me off the street. There was no process at all, which, it's just interesting to see how, yeah. And then, of course, I've had those weird questions. I had somebody in our group mention that they had an interview not too long ago, and one of the questions was, if you were a type of ice cream, what type would you be? And those kind of weird, and it's like, what does that have to do with anything? You just feel kind of frustrated. So anyway.
Yeah, great examples.
The hiring process can be very interesting.
Yeah, it's true. I've been asked those questions, like, if you were a fruit, what would you be? It's like, I just like to eat fruit. So, good point, having that process. So, yeah, we've kind of focused on filling the pool. Situation where the pool is always small. You got to think through that too. So think of ways to solve for that. What do you think?
Recruitment. You got to find the right places to recruit. You got to bring them in you got to get the word out.
Yep, definitely.
The SG Cohen case, didn't they only choose like a few select schools, and then they had to like expand it a little bit?
Exactly. They made an adjustment in their sourcing.
Yes.
So what did they do? What were they doing before?
They were going for like the top-notch Eastern schools. They were going for
the top 10 was it? Top 10
NYU,
business schools?
Chicago, Columbia, Cornell, Berkeley, Notre Dame, Washington University.
Yep.
And then,
good. And what caused them to make a change?
They were getting middle class people.
Right. So they were getting the lower performers in those schools.
Weren't they losing people as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a little bit of both. So yeah, we've got to grow our pool. So if you constantly don't have enough of good applicants or good choices, you've got to look outside of that process and find out who we're funneling in, who we're sourcing. So it's, recruiting is all about starting with how we're attracting talent, who we're sourcing, and who we're attracting, and getting the right people in there. Good. So knowing what you're looking for is huge. Being specific. How can this apply to us? So my thought for you guys, if you're in the workforce or looking for work or not, know this information too. This is going to help you, because if you're interviewing, know what your core competencies are. Know what you bring, and if you find a match, that's going to help you in making a decision if you get offers. The other side of it is the culture side of it. Now, we talk about culture a lot, and culture in HR is kind of a fascinating word for me. What is culture?
I think it's
So we
kind of
talk-
like
what's
the
our-
values and the values and I can't think of another word, but the values that the company kind of has, and they tend to hire employees that hold those same values, so it creates a culture of whatever they focus on. The culture of service, or a culture of high performance, or a culture of whatever they are focusing on.
Excellent. So values. Yep. Great. Anything
How
else?
about they need to feel like they're accepted and that others are also accepted into their group or into their business.
All right. So how they support each other.
Yeah.
Good. What else could culture mean? I think that covers it pretty good. Culture is a set of behaviors, right? So values, like Catherine said, values determine what we do. So I tell our new hires every time they come in, I say, everybody has a set of values. Even if you don't know what they are, everybody has them, because those determine what we do. So our culture is how we operate. It's how the way things are done around here is my favorite little definition of culture. And so learning about the culture of a company, finding cultural fit for our candidates, finding competency fit and cultural fit, it's kind of a double-edged challenge. So do you think S.G. Cohen's method is good for identifying culture?
I think it is because think back at the beginning of it, they actually had a night out before the Super Saturday, where they could like mingle and talk and get to know each other on a personal level, not just on a interview level.
Good. Yeah, so watching people interact. Yeah, that's a good way to assess people.
I was wondering if Super Saturday was set up as a high pressure environment just for that same reason, for the culture of the corporate culture, the culture of the type of business, that they need to be able to function in this kind of go, 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 kind of environment, and just see how they responded.
Good thought. What do you think, everybody? Do you think they set it up that way on purpose?
I agree with Michelle. I think they needed to see the different stages of people, of those candidates. When you go to an interview and it's just an hour or two or something like that, it's easy to be your best self. But when you go under pressure and you're put in positions where you're not comfortable, then that's when you show your true self. And I think, in this case, they could not, they cannot not hire the best people. So that's their culture. They were really looking for people that could do their jobs and also could bring value to their business. So I totally agree with Michelle.
John agrees. Yeah, it helps them. It shows them the comfort level of the candidates in front of people. Think about what big banks need. They're going to be in high pressure negotiation situations. And so they're going to want to see if they're going to buckle or if they're going to stay cool under the pressure. So definitely might give us some great insight into why they did the Super Saturday setup and making the quick sale and all that stuff. Yep, test communication skills, huge deal. I actually was in an interview just this last week, and it was a second round interview, and I was talking to an attorney that worked for the company, and he was he was really grilling me with questions, and he'd give me some pretty difficult scenarios. He wanted to see how, he wasn't trying to intimidate me. He wanted to see how I would respond to those. So if you're ever in that kind of situation, stay cool. Know what the interviewer is trying to do. They're trying to see if you can think on your feet, how you respond, because your experience and how you operate will show in those situations. So, and sometimes interviewers they do that. They have fun with that, and sometimes they get pretty mean. But there's a good balance. If you can find a good balance on that, I think it's a helpful thing. So that brings me to another word that's pulled out in the definitive guide, that word of assessment. So we've talked about finding core competencies, kind of assessing for culture, making those assessments. So are we as people good at assessing talent? What did you pull from the reading about that?
I think sometimes we are, other times we're not. It's also
Okay.
like their own personal outlook, where they're at that period of time.
Yeah, so what makes the difference? Why are sometimes we good at it and sometimes we're not?
Well, I think experience definitely helps out a lot with that. I think that the more you are around people, especially people of a certain talent or skill, then you tend to be able to pick that out pretty quickly. If I could just use an example, my cousin, who's in the National Guard, he's been around a lot of people who are active military. So like, even like Navy SEALs, Green Beret, things like that. And he's even said that, he could, if he's walking around in a grocery store, he can pick out and see, just like the way that the people hold themselves and conduct themselves, just the way somebody is standing, that they are military. And so I think that just people, especially senior associates, would be able to pick up on skills that they know are good, and even use situations they've come across to pick out whether people would be able to handle it like an associate they're looking for.
Good example. Thanks, Jared, and welcome, by the way.
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, you're good.
I think that for some people, being able to recognize the strengths and stuff in others is a talent in and of itself. I think it comes naturally to some people, and to others of it, like me, I just think everybody's good at everything. And I mean, I just give people the benefit of the doubt, and I don't know. I have a hard time judging that kind of thing, but there are people that do. My boss at work, I work for a small software engineering firm. We only have like 15 employees, but he was in my ward, and we happened to be in the ward council together for a while, and he approached me a couple years later after that and asked, I can just kind of tell by how you were on the ward council that you would fit good. And then he just hired another kid because they always go to this sounds so crazy, but they always go to Taco Bell for lunch, and he was one of the assistant managers at the Taco Bell, and he just really liked how he worked with other people and how thorough he was and everything else. And he's good at seeing things in people that will fit into his company. And so he doesn't really call people in. He approaches them, people that he's met, and says to them, hey, I'm looking for somebody. Would you be interested in this type of thing? So I think some people are just good at it. They just know what they need, and they're good at seeing it in other people. Some people, maybe it's a little bit harder for them to do that.
Yeah, I like it. That's something that can be developed. That goes with Jared's comment about experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that. So, and then John said something similar. We tend to base talent off of our own abilities. I know I tend to put my own ideals and expectations on others and expect them to meet challenges how I would. Yeah, so we tend to view others through our own lens of how we live and what we're good at. Elora, I think expectations, we tend to expect specifics from people even when the position does not require those specifics. Yep, so we tend to profile. That happens. And then it's important to be aware of our own biases. Yes. Comfort zone. Good point. So, yeah, we can get that talent. We can observe, and in HR world, they call it, following your gut reaction. So that can do a lot of good, especially if you've got that experience. We're going to be able to see things. We're going to be able to pick up on cues and get a lot swifter at making those type of decisions. What are the pitfalls, or what could be some pitfalls of going just off our gut, if that makes sense? Any danger in that?
There is if you haven't done your research. If you just are going straight off of a gut feeling, I mean, a lot of times your gut feelings are pretty good, but you need to make sure you've been thorough in doing your research, because it can come back to burn you.
Excellent. So are you talking about research about that person, or?
Well, research on both ways, knowing what you want in a candidate for a job position and being specific about that, and then also, making sure you've kind of done a thorough interview process and background, or whatever you need specifically for that job, that you've been thorough with that to make sure everything lines up.
Yes, I like it. So do your homework, right? Be clear on what you need. If your gut is the spirit, no problems. Nice work, John.
If I could add something along the lines with what Catherine was saying, is doing your homework. I think that maybe by identifying our own biases, so maybe like if we have a bias against people who, let's say for instance, have only a degree but no work experience, if you're hiring, maybe understanding the type of skills that person gains from an education, and see if the position you're hiring for needs someone like that. Maybe this position, it's pretty easy to pick up on the hands-on skills, but having that education is key to being able to perform. And so I think that by doing research and understanding the position you're trying to fill, you can better assess whether this person, with their background or their personality, is truly the best fit. Yeah, so like Courtney was saying, key to perform, whether they are the
Excellent.
best performer.
So yeah, that balance between education and experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This reminds me of something I came across a couple weeks ago in some of our reading, was the idea that like hires like. And I was thinking about that in terms of opposites attract, where my husband and I complement one another. And sometimes going through this process, you realize, well, maybe sometimes in hiring, you have to be careful about that like hires like, because maybe what the company doesn't need is another one of you. You know what I mean? Kind of look outside of that a little bit.
Balance of, okay, do I need these skills now, or what am I willing to develop in that person? If there's development opportunity, do I have the ability and the energy to extend that development effort, or do I need that skill base right away? So lots of little factors and nuances. Ilari mentioned that, following a feeling created by emotion, there's a lot of people that are great sellers of themselves. Yeah, and I think that was one of the pitfalls I was thinking of. Sometimes if you're in that hiring session meeting or the SG Cohen session, there's a lot of people that are really good at interviewing. They're really good at presenting themselves. But when you actually examine what they are able to do skill-wise, you might have some gaps. And so that could be a pitfall. But if you have both sides of that, if you have if you have a good process, and then you have that sense of who to bring in and who to source, I think you can make some great decisions.
I think it's a balance. Way I look at it is I would look at what my weaknesses are. If I'm not good at, say, technology, for instance, and I seek out someone who is good in technology, that would add to my company and bring things even better. So I think that's what I was getting out of what Michelle was saying, is trying to find those that are different than you are.
Excellent. Going back to that diversity idea, right? Good. Some interesting one-liners in the guide. So under the heading, it said hiring gets a failing grade, because they, in their research, it says shockingly only half of the top X managers recruited were interviewed by anyone in the C-suite. Fully half the companies relied primarily on the hiring manager's gut feel, selecting a candidate believed to have what it took to be successful in any job. So it's important to have the right people doing the interviews. We've talked a little bit about that. And it even made the comment in there, even the past has become unpredictable. And that's where I wrote down that word assessment. So I actually, one of the authors of this wrote a book called Making Great People Decisions. So he really dives further into this, if you study into that. And he uses the example of a group of engineers, and it was like 70% of engineers say that they are above average in their skills. It's like, mathematically, that does not work. So we tend to inflate our own abilities, and sometimes we can misjudge on those assessments. So having a few different ways to make those assessments safeguards us from making an emotional or inflated decision. Does that make sense? Do you think that's necessary?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, that would go with the comments about emotions that you made, Laura.
Yes.
All right. So as you can see, getting the right people on the bus, if you're reading Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus is key to making your organization go where you want it to go.
And not just get them on the bus, get them the right seats on the bus.
Get them on the right seat. Thank you, Courtney. Yep, exactly. Get them on the right seat. So hopefully you're making the best decisions up front, so then you don't have to worry about getting people off the seats down the road, right? Because retention is then an issue.
Yep.
So there's a ton of directions to go. One thing I definitely wanted to hit on is we've talked about developing the pool, assessing the candidate. I highlighted in there, it's more important to choose the right assessors than focus on the assessment technique. So having those right people doing the assessing. And then behavioral event interviews. That's something important to hit on. So the way you do your interviewing can be very important. What do we mean when we say behavioral interview? If you've been in an interview and they're asking you questions like this, like, tell me of a time that you had a conflict with a coworker or a boss. Anybody had questions like that given to them?
I highly dislike those questions.
You do? Why?
Because if they say, like, fill it on the spot, like, I'm like, then I have no way to escape.
Yep.
Unless I think quickly and fudge or something.
It does. It puts you on the spot. So as a person being interviewed, that can be a little nerve-wracking. Why would that be helpful to a company and to an interviewer?
I think that it's helpful to an interviewer because it kind of shows you how those people react to different questions. I know I've been on the end of giving those questions as well as being asked them. And I've noticed that when I ask people those questions, you can see in their faces, and you can see their minds working, and you can see kind of how they're processing the question. And I think that adds as much as to what they say. You know, it helps you understand how that person truly behaves and reacts to questions that seem a little unorthodox or things that put them in the corner.
Yeah, you can see how they react. John was saying similar things. It seems as though there is or isn't a twinkle in their eyes. Yeah, I like that.
I had a question like that on one of my interviews. That they asked me, you know, if my feelings would get hurt if I did something wrong, and they came to tell me that I did something wrong. And I had a few people in that interview, and I thought for a second, and I just turned it around and told them, no, I'm pretty easygoing. If I did something wrong, I'd rather have somebody come and tell me that. Now, I told him on a lighter sense, if you come and tell me that I'm ugly, then yeah, I might get a little upset. So, I think it helps them see how you will, personally, how you will fit with the rest of the group. Can you get along with other people? So I think they ask those questions because of that. They need to know just how you will fit with the rest of the group.
Yeah, and so when we're interviewing, the questions we ask, they should be pre-planned, because they're going to help. A good behavioral question should help us identify a quality or a competency that we want to see.
I think.
Okay? And if
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think also it helps the interviewer to know what people get out of situations. For example, if you had a conflict with your boss or had a situation, what did you learn from that? And you know, what did you apply the next time something like that happened? So how are you growing because of those situations?
Yeah, it kind of helps us see what they processed, right? What they learned.
Yes.
Perfect. So can we get a glimpse of core competencies and maybe cultural fit from a behavioral question? Versus just a question of, hey, tell me about this.
What was that question again?
Yeah.
I was just exploring the idea. Sorry, not a clear question. So we've talked about identifying core competencies, right? Identify people's skills and what we really need, and then identifying for job fit or culture fit. Do you think a behavioral question, you know, those questions where you say, tell me about a time when this happened, can those questions accomplish both?
I think so. I had a job interview one time that I had to, they asked me, tell me about a time when you had something a project or something that you were working on, and how did you go about finishing it, or something like that. And for girls camp one year, we made a bazillion little shrinky dink dolls for all the 250 or 300 young women in our stake. And it was tedious and took forever. And I was able to use that. And I think it showed that I can finish a job. I'm dependable. I can work on it until the end, even though it's just mind-numbingly horrible. And, you know, it shows that you can get things done. Some of those kind of questions. So I think it can kind of serve both purposes, because they can already see what your skills are from your resume and from the things they've talked to you about, but now they want to know how you go about using those skills. Are you somebody that's going to give up after 10 minutes of it being horrible, or are you going to just dig in and get the thing done and be done with it.
Thank you. That's a good example.
I think that's a really good example because you're right. If there's so many different ways that you can answer that reveal a little bit about your skills and your character. Did you branch out and get help? Did you try to, did you take, some, initiative and manage some of it on extra time on your own? How you took care of that tells a little bit about your leadership skills, and I think probably a little bit about your character and how you manage other people in a project. So that's interesting. That's an interesting example. I was thinking about my son interviewed for the position he's at right now in Wisconsin, and one of the questions he said that some of the interviewees talked about afterward, what that was really hard was, tell us about a key failure and how you managed this key failure, because they're so used to having to show their strengths, and it was interesting to have him talk to me about his answer, and it was in relation to some events on his mission. And one of the interviewers said that he was so just upfront and honest about the experience. He wasn't apologetic at all. He didn't even blink when it's like, oh, this instance on my LDS mission, and he kind of briefly talked about how, I'm away from my family, have no contact. He was in a remote area in Poland with one other companion about 5 hours from the mission home. So, but he just kind of went right into it and just unapologetically, so he didn't even think about what are they going to think of me, and they just thought that was great. And I thought, well, that what an interesting process for him to go through, and for them to be able to talk about afterward, and how that experience went, and what it revealed about a person.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, it shows a lot. And I think being calculated and being very deliberate in our recruiting and hiring and interviewing and assessment efforts is very important, because we want to get the right people in place. And those questions can elicit those type of responses, those examples that we want to see. And you can tell right away, if there's someone they don't share a specific example, but more of a general, hey, here's what I would do. You know that they might not have had that experience, or at least can't think about it. Final thought. I know we're short on the time. Final thought was step 6 in the guide. Integrate the newcomer. Many hire experienced professionals, expecting them to be plug and play. So, if it's a seasoned executive or somebody that's got 20 years of experience, we're not done hiring the person when they're in role. And onboarding is a huge part of it. Giving that next 90 days a lot of focus so that people can be successful. We're really setting people up for success or failure depending on how we have our selection and hiring processes, including that onboarding. So just something to throw out there. In closing, I've shared this in other slides or other thoughts, but this is section 64 of the Doctrine and Covenants, 33 and 34. So this has come to my mind as the Lord's talent philosophy. And I love this verse. It says, "Wherefore be not weary in well-doing, for ye are laying the foundation of a great work, and out of small things proceedeth that which is great. Behold, the Lord requireth the heart and a willing mind, and the willing and obedient shall eat the good of the land of Zion in these last days." Lord's point of view, and in our service to the Lord, his talent philosophy is, okay, if I have your heart, and if you have a willing mind, and you're obedient, you'll be able to flourish in Zion. And I'm grateful for that. I know that's very much the truth. The Lord is focused on our talents because he is the source of our talents. And so if we just give him our hearts and our minds, we can become our best selves. So definitely translates to us in what we do and how we can help others accomplish that in their lives. That's where the fulfillment comes, and that experience and that wisdom comes from. So I wanted to share that with you. And if any of you are book nerds, there's 2 books that come to mind out of making that gut reaction decision. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink. Another author, I can't remember his name, wrote a book called Think. So Gladwell's book is about making those gut reaction decisions. The other Think book is more of, hey, you have to have the experience, you have to have the time and the observation to be able to make those gut decisions. So there's thoughts on both sides. But anyway, book review there. But keep up the great work. And as always, if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you.